All right. Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's good to have you here. My name is Luke. Today, we have our fourth lesson in our job interview series with Pearson English. This is our 5-lesson series on job interview English. Today, we're going to be talking about answering advanced questions in English. So we have a lot to talk about. I think it's going to be very interesting. I think you'll enjoy it. As you join, put your name in the chat if you want. Say where you're watching from. And if you have any basic questions, we will get to the more, let's say, complicated questions later on in today's lesson. But again, say where you're watching from. And that will be a good way to sort of get a sense for where everybody is before we get started. Again, my name is Luke, and I will be your teacher for today. Okay, I see we have some people joining already, which is great. Welcome. Hi. From India and from Portugal, Manuela is here. Hello. Magha, hello. Good to have you. We're going to give it a few minutes here at the start. Again, we've done this for the last 3, so if you've watched up to now, this should not be a new thing. Because we're live, we give people a few minutes to join. We give everybody a chance before we get right into the topic. Ezra from Istanbul, Carlos from Ecuador, hello, welcome. Luciana from Brazil, good to have you, of course. We're going to be talking about quite a bit today, but I think most importantly, you want to be able to answer those difficult questions with confidence, of course, even if you didn't prepare for those, right? Even if that wasn't one of the questions that you got ready for, right? And so we're going to talk about how to do that. We'll be learning some ways to answer questions, we could say more advanced questions about your character, skills, your knowledge. And, these are the questions in the interview that really matter, because that's where the interviewer wants to find out, okay, what can you do? Okay, what do you know, right? We'll also talk about how you can ask questions. That's really important. We often don't think about that. When you're in an interview, you should be asking questions too, not just answering questions. So how do we do that, right? And hypotheticals we'll talk about as well. Very important. Maria from Ukraine. By the way, when you see me looking down like that, that's because I'm looking at the chat, okay? So checking the chat. Camera, chat, all right? Richar, hello. Hola, yes. Warsaw. LinkedIn user Jarek from Warsaw. Of course, apologies if I mispronounce anybody's name. I'll do my best. Carmen from Madrid, Spain. And is that Ionella? Ionella from Romania. From Iran, from Armenia, from Sri Lanka, from Brazil. Cool beans. Yeah, so this is going to be, I think, a really interesting chance to also ask questions that you may have. So I really want you to be thinking about as we go along. I wish I could ask a question about this to someone who knew. This might be a good chance to do that, okay? So, yes, ask questions. Think about your own career goals, your own interview process. What do you need help with? What can I help you answer in terms of English, right? Phrasing, how to state a question, for example. Maybe something cultural, right? A lot of different things that might be a bit challenging. At the end of this, we're going to be doing a Q&A. I will be answering some questions as well throughout our lesson today, but at the end will be the dedicated Q&A part. All right? I think we can get started. I'm going to bring up the old slides. Wow, more people joining from Turkey, from Germany, Lebanon, hello. And oh, I see Mondley is here, very exciting. Haleyson from Italy. I've never seen so many different countries at one time in my life. Joining from Colombia, Laura. Wonderful. All right. So, we're gonna go over our objectives for today. Okay, and then we're going to talk about character, skills, and knowledge, right? Then we're going to be doing some English phrases that will be essential for today's lesson, and I'm going to be challenging you also throughout. So I hope you're ready to answer some questions, give some feedback, share your opinion. Okay? All right. So let's get into it. I want to first just cover our objectives, right? We want to be able to answer questions naturally, right? With confidence, even if that is not one of the questions you prepared for. Remember, we talked about the STAR method in one of our previous lessons. 2, actually. How do you prepare for a question? Okay, well, that's great. That's how you prepare for a question. But what if you didn't prepare for that specific question? Okay, how do you handle that? We're going to be focusing on useful English for talking about character, skills, and knowledge, right? Which is, of course, very important in the interview process. We're going to talk about how you can give insightful answers to hypothetical questions. Oh, that's kind of difficult. How do you answer a what would you do question? What would you do if this happened? How do you answer that? Naturally, we'll talk about it. And very importantly, how to ask questions. If you don't ask any questions, I think you actually may negatively affect how well the interviewer will remember you, right? If you ask some questions, I think it can show some good traits about you, right? Okay. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Laura and Mila, hello. Great. Let's get into character, skills, and knowledge. Okay? I want you to, when you're going into the interview, always ask yourself, especially when you're asked a specific question, why are they asking me this? Right? So whenever the interviewer asks you a question, usually they're trying to find out something about you with that question. If they're asking for a previous experience, a time when, why? Well, they want to know about something you did in the past that may show an ability you have, some knowledge you have, some skills that you have, right? If you just answer that question for yourself, why are they asking me this? Then you'll be able to, if you haven't prepared for this question they just asked you, then you'll be able to at least come up with an answer, an idea for an answer that's going to show your best traits, that's going to show what you want to show in the interview, right? So to be ready for any question, that's the first thing. Why are they asking me this? If they ask you a question and you say, I don't know, and you don't really think about, oh, wait, they're asking me this question for a reason. They want to learn something about me. That's at least the first thing. Then you choose the specific knowledge, character, and key skills that you want to mention. Okay, they asked me about a time when I had to work with a difficult colleague. This is as they're asking the question, you're thinking, I didn't prepare for that question specifically, but I want to show that I can work well with others no matter what. I'm very patient, and I put the project first over personal issues. That's just a thought I'm having right now as I'm being asked that question that I didn't prepare for. So that's a very important step, because if you do that, then at least, well, you're showing the things you want to show rather than just trying to find something without really thinking carefully about it when they ask a question that you didn't prepare for, right? But also very important to let your personality shine through. Be yourself. Be real. We've talked about this in previous lessons. Be real. Don't think, okay, what do they want me to say? Be yourself, be real, and that will shine through, right? Choose a real example, an authentic example. And it may be a good idea if you can include, for example, you're telling a story about a time when you had to work with a difficult colleague. It may include other perspectives, maybe someone else in that story, or what someone else might say about you based on that, or how it impacted or affected others. Having a little bit of an outside perspective can add some, we could say, credibility, can add some strength to what you're saying, even though you're the one who's saying it, okay? And of course, as we've talked about throughout this series, stories and examples, very important. Always think, don't just answer the question, can I add an example? Right? I didn't prepare for this question, but I think I can come up with an example on the spot that's going to show that. Or I can tell a story that's going to show that. We want to show rather than tell. Okay? So that's just a few things. Someone says they often feel like trick questions. What do you mean? All questions feel like trick questions? Sometimes an interviewer may, I think, ask a trick question, but I don't know. I don't know if that's the most common thing to do. I haven't seen it happen very often. I find interviewers don't have a lot of time to be thinking of trick questions. What to do if the interviewer asks us a question which is not even related to the job requirements? Yeah, that's a good question. Again, that's why you need to kind of go through these steps. They can ask anything they want, right? They could ask something related to your life and how you handle things personally. Or, oh, your time in high school. I didn't think they were going to ask about high school. But again, all you have to do, why are they asking me this? Oh, they want to find out. Okay. Identify the things you want to show, choose your examples, be real, and try to include some outside perspective if you can. And Manuela, we will get to hypothetical questions very soon. We're going to be talking about those, okay? So I have a question for you guys. If you were asked either an experience question, a knowledge question, or a hypothetical question, which one do you think is most challenging? Is it more challenging to answer an experience question where you talk about what you did in the past? Is it more challenging to ask a knowledge question where you have to talk about things that you know about? Or is it more challenging to talk about a hypothetical question, which is, for example, what would you do if? What would you have done if? If you were, what would you do? This sort of question is a hypothetical. What do you think? Manuela says, oh, you were answering the question. I see. Ritik says hypothetical. LinkedIn user says hypothetical. Haleyson says hypothetical. All right. Hypothetical. Everyone seems to think hypothetical. I tend to agree, not just because of the grammar, which, by the way, I'm going to teach you how to answer the specific English phrases for answering a hypothetical today, but also, yes, you're thinking about something that's not real. So you're not just sharing a story, although you can use stories for those. Yeah, I agree. So someone did say B, a knowledge question. It could be, depending on the question. Yeah. I tend to agree with the majority in the chat. So let's just say a few questions that you might be asked. I don't want to spend any time really talking about these. I just want to give you a flavor of questions that you may be asked about your knowledge, about your skills, about your experience. What would your previous employer say about you? Okay, now you're kind of there answering a hypothetical, but you're using hopefully something real, right? So you still want to go through that process. Why are they asking this? Okay, and what do I want to show? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Okay, now we're talking about perhaps character, but maybe also skills in what you may want to learn in 5 years, in the next 5 years. Character being, what kind of person are you? What vision do you have for yourself? Are you very ambitious? Are you not very ambitious, but you're very careful? And what kind of person are you? That could be your character, but also skills, I think. Have you ever worked with a difficult colleague? Again, that's a pretty common one because they want to see how you can deal with conflicts, right? What approach do you take to a new project? Oh, you handle something you haven't had to deal with before, right? How do you do that? Maybe this is about a little bit about your knowledge and your skills. What is your way of dealing with that? And that's a great place to share, I think, a great place to share a story. Okay, so that's just a few questions you may be asked. But I want to get into specifically hypotheticals, and then we're going to talk about how we can answer those hypotheticals. I'm going to give you the beginnings of that so that you know how to answer. And again, as you're joining, if you have questions, you can ask them. I will do my best to answer, but we're going to have a Q&A section at the end. Nurman's here from Istanbul. Hello. Rocco from Sicily. Hello. Great to have you. So you might be asked a couple of in a few different ways, right? Hypotheticals like how would you handle this? How might you deal with maybe your company working with another company and you have to go to another city, right, to work with a team that you haven't worked with before? How might you deal with that? Oh, okay, I would. Then you can start answering that question. Again, I'll give you the phrases in a second. What would you do if? That's a very common one. How would you handle and what would you do if? What would you do if you got, I don't know, laid off? It could be any sort of question. What would you do if you were offered a promotion over someone else who you knew maybe deserved the promotion more? Any sort of hypothetical like this. And what would be the best way to do something? What would be the best way to learn something, handle something, fix something, work with someone? All of those. Try to put in out of confidence. Yeah, I mean, you want to be very confident, but it has to be real. So that's why it's so important to prepare, because you want to be real, right? You want to be able to authentically answer questions, and if you do that and you're comfortable because you prepared very well, that's going to come across as, I think, confidence, okay? So generally a hypothetical is trying to understand your current abilities, your judgment, things like that. And I want to mention that it's not always just, okay, let me answer this question now. It may also be, well, let's talk about it. And it's just so it could turn into a dialogue with the interviewer rather than just a long 10-minute answer. So that's, I think, important to keep in mind. right? You might make it more conversational. And probably saying, I don't know. It's probably not a good idea. Okay, so we're going to talk about now how you can answer these questions. I'm just going to check the chat. Hi, everyone from Julio from Peru. Thanks a lot, Pearson. Great to have you, Julio. Abdul. If a question like this, between your mother and father, who do you love more? Abdul, I think I would say I respectfully decline to answer that question. You can answer a question by saying, I don't think I can answer that question. It would be a weird question to ask in an interview. Absolutely. Yeah. Hi from Spain. Great to have you. From South Africa, we've got people here from everywhere. That is wonderful. So what about the English phrases that we can use here, right? If you want to answer a hypothetical, there is a specific grammatical structure. And usually it involves using words like were, would, could, would, right? Might, you could use sometimes as well. We're answering a question that's not a real situation. We're being asked to imagine a situation. And when we imagine the situation, you put yourself there, right? If you had $1 billion, what would you do? Oh, if I were a billionaire, I would. Okay, then you can state that. It's a very interesting sort of question, right? So when you answer simply, if I were, I would, if you're talking about, for example, a position, a role, right? But you might say, if I had the chance to talk about a thing you may do. So if I had the chance, maybe, to travel abroad for work, I might want to spend a few months in advance learning the language, studying the culture, so that I can handle everything well. So that's focusing not on if I were this type of person, but maybe if given an opportunity, if I had the opportunity to do that, right? If I had the chance. Very interesting question. If I could, that means if it is possible. Could is about possibility. Is it possible? Yes or no? If I could travel abroad, I think I would maybe want to stay for a few months, learn as much as I can, and then come back. I don't like to spend too much time away from home, for example. So I'm not saying I will do that absolutely, but maybe I think I would is a way to say probably. Right? Having I think in there is a little less certain, a little less confident. Sometimes that's okay when you don't want to say something too assertively, right? If that were to happen, I would probably, okay, so now we're talking about a situation. Something has happened. How would you deal with this? How would you deal with something going wrong? 3 people on your team suddenly quit. If that were to happen, I would probably first want to understand why, what happened before I did anything, before I looked around to blame someone, before I got upset. I would probably want to understand exactly what happened. And in the same way, in that situation, I would have. But this one is more about the past, right? Someone may give you a situation that's real in the past that you were not involved in. A few years ago in this company, we had a major shift in policies that affected a lot of people. And some people decided to just quit, and some people decided to stay and adapt to the changes. In that situation, I would have. So you're answering how you would have handled a situation that you weren't actually in, right? And I think that's a really useful way to really connect yourself to this company, maybe to some situation that the interviewer is really familiar with or that they really care about. And if I could do it over, I would be to talk about mistakes, right? This is where you're talking about perhaps a weakness. You're talking about something that you could improve, some mistake you made in the past, which is okay to talk about. You can't do it over, do it again. But if I could do it over, I would have. Very, very useful. Okay, very interesting, I think. I would go to a rainforest, I think. Okay. Don't forget to answer that little question in your head of what are they? Why are they asking? So you want to always be thinking, I have to show my skills, show my knowledge, show my experience. I'm not just here to talk about random stuff. We're here to talk about why I am a good fit for this role, right? Okay. B is right. Oh, which B? Now I'm going to give you a new one to look at. Pearl, welcome. From Virginia, hello, 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 hello. I would go to a rainforest from sunny Abu Dhabi. Hello, hello, hello. So, question. What would you do if someone blamed you for something that was not your fault? Okay, I want to hear your answer on this one. What would you do? If you want to use that phrase, I would, or if I were blamed, I would. If I were blamed for something, I would. If you want to use that, you can. Then say what you would do. If you want to just choose A, B, or C, that's okay too. I would accept the blame. I would correct them. Or I would do something else. What else? What else would you do? So I would like to know what you would do if you were blamed for something that was absolutely not your fault, not your issue. Okay. And welcome to those still joining. I see we have more and more joining. Elise says it depends, and I would ask, it depends on what? Can you add a little bit more detail? Again, to those just joining, thank you for joining. Today, we're talking about how to answer advanced interview questions. We're talking about hypotheticals, skills, knowledge, experience, and these are the questions that we would get, that are a little bit more challenging, maybe a little more difficult than a simple, what are your strengths and weaknesses, which is what we have talked about in previous lessons. This is the 4th lesson of our 5-lesson series with Pearson, and my name is Luke Priddy. We are doing this series together. It's been very fun and interesting so far, and I hope you can join for the next one as well. That's going to be at the same time next Thursday, okay? So every Thursday. B, correct them. B, correct them, okay. I would try to explain if the person's opinion matters to me, says Elise. That's a good one. Everyone's saying B. I would try to find, I'm just reading comments here, okay. I would try to find, this is from, there's no name, some kind of proof that would show I wasn't to blame. Okay, I think that's reasonable. I keep going back to, I would go to a rainforest. If I were blamed by others, I would go to a rainforest. Anyway, Ionella says B. At least I would just stop my relationship with that person. Interesting. Potter says, sorry I'm late. What did I miss? You're here, Potter. You're good. We have a lot of stuff still to talk about. Q&A also coming up. Okay, I like Gabriel's answer. B and then no, it wasn't me, and then explain or do something. Oh, do something else. Go to a rainforest, perhaps. Is there a particular reason you can't see my name? I don't know. That's a very good question. All I see in the chat, I see everyone else's name, but for your name, all I see is LinkedIn user, which I'm assuming is not your real name. But you can type your name at the beginning of each comment, put your name, then a colon there, and then your comment, and then I can read it. Nice to meet you. Manaz, hello. I will try my best to explain the chronology, says Abdul, of the story, then I will correct them. I think that's a really good way to say it. Instead of just saying, wasn't me, you can say, okay, here's what happened. First, this happened, and then another thing happened, and that's why you think it was me, when in reality, it was something else. So that's the situation. So there it's not a simple, wasn't me, it's a full explanation. I like that. I think that's great. Julio says, I would do something else. Okay. Okay. All right. Good answers, everybody. Thank you. So let's get into questions. Very, very important. Now, what I mean by questions is you need to be asking questions. How can you ask questions in the interview of others, of the interviewer, of the recruiter, for example, if you're emailing, right? This is, I think, an understated thing. It's actually very important to ask some questions. Why? Well, number one, you might get clarification on responsibilities of the job, but that also shows your initiative. It shows that you're curious, you're thinking about this. You're not just showing up to an interview, you're actually thinking about the role, thinking about the responsibilities, you're actually thinking through it. It shows part of your character, perhaps, that you are always trying to find the answer, that you want to learn more, that you are proactive, that you show initiative. I think it's a great, it accomplishes so many things, right? You might also, if you're asking about the team dynamic, that shows that you're willing to maybe adapt, right? You're willing to adapt to different ways of working, to a new team culture, right? And it may include something about what you know, your research. If you research this company and the culture before you go to the interview, before you attend the interview, then when you ask a question, so I know that in the team, every 2 weeks, you do these retrospectives where you review the performance of individuals within a 2-week period, which is uncommon. Now, I'm wondering if that's usually done in writing or that's a team meeting. So what you're showing there is, I know what happens in this company. I'm well prepared for this interview. I'm already kind of tuned in, right? And so that can really make you stand out and, of course, help you learn. You may have actual questions, help you learn something, right, about how the company works. Now, how do we actually phrase these questions? So on the English side of things, right, what's the right way to state the questions? So let's go into that. We're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about something that someone has asked, I think, in every lesson so far. What about salary? We're going to talk about how to bring up salary, and I'm actually going to be giving you an example of how to ask about salary. I'm going to be, or how to, let's say, make a salary request, state your preference. So be sure to stick around for that. Anything but not going to a rainforest has become a theme for today. Julio, hello. Oh, you were here before. You joined earlier. Good to have everyone here today. Thank you for joining. And thanks for all of the answers to the question. That's fantastic. It's great to see. I'm going to take a quick tea sip break. I'm drinking chamomile tea in the morning. Can you imagine that? I've always been a coffee drinker, but I decided, I want something calming, soothing. I don't want to be so high energy today. I don't need to be. Just chamomile tea, herbal tea, very nice. All right, so let's get into the English for how we can phrase these questions. And this is where you may want to be ready to take screenshots. There's nothing wrong with doing that. If you want to remember these phrases for later, take a picture. That's a good idea. I do that all the time. If I'm watching something and I see something, I'll take a quick screenshot, save it for later, and then maybe do a bit more research or practice examples later on. So, how can we begin these questions? Can you tell me more about those bi-weekly retrospectives? I learned about them. I have a friend who works. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. Who worked here before, and he told me about the retrospectives. Could you tell me more about those? Could you explain the work from home policy in a little bit more detail? I know that you have to go into the office once in a while, but I'm not quite sure what the policy is. Could you explain that? But again, when you ask a question, you should be thinking about what that question shows about you. So just, be aware of that. Could you explain, maybe, how usually people in the design department will approach a project? Are they usually working closely with other teams? Or is it just tickets and they're responding to tickets? How usually are designers in the design department working on things? What is the initiator of maybe something they're going to work on, a project? Are they responsive or proactive? Okay, maybe I would ask about that. Okay. Typically, what is the structure of teams? Or maybe typically, how much movement is there between teams? Or typically, what kind of tools? Or typically, how often? You can ask this sort of question starting with typically to sort of mention a frequency to say, is this normal or not, right? What is, but also how often? What would you recommend as a good way to maybe prepare for some specific thing? What would you recommend? I'm trying to get some advice from the interviewer. Asking for advice can be a great way to make the interviewer feel, oh, my opinion is respected. Oh, okay, I can give you some advice. What would you recommend is a good way for me to maybe prepare for working in the design department? Maybe I need to learn about some specific tools, whatever it may be, right? Would it be possible? Now, this is a little different. Would it be possible is you want to know if it's a yes or a no, usually, and you're trying to find out the answer to something. Would it be possible? I know that there is this would be perhaps later on in the process, right? And we're already talking a lot about my future employment here. Would it be possible for me to maybe travel to different cities and sometimes even different countries? Because I know that I can work remotely, but would it be possible for me to travel around if I were to be hired here? Not an issue. Or no, we have a policy in place where you cannot be in any one place for longer, any different place besides your home location for X number of days, right? Some companies have rules about where you can be, right? Now, then you could say, could we discuss? Now, this is a great question when you want to bring up that slightly awkward topic, that slightly uncomfortable topic of whatever, including salary. So this is where you might say, could we discuss the compensation or salary? Now, actually, I don't know if everyone can see it, but I'm going to put compensation in the chat. Could we discuss the compensation? Oh, everyone's put it in. Got it. I think it puts it in everywhere. That's cool. Compensation is how much you're going to be paid for this role. And you could talk about other things too. You could talk about healthcare. You could talk about benefits. You could talk about maybe something you're concerned about, right? All good. This is a good way to approach that. Now, before we get to specifically how to state your salary request, perhaps we could go into a few statements where we want to just mention something. We don't want to ask it as a question. We just want to mention something. Okay. So in terms of, in terms of the maybe structure of teams, now you state the topic. Then you might ask a question or say something that you're wondering about and hope you get a response, right? I want to understand more about, then state what you want to understand more about, some policy. Maybe you want to understand more about the job requirements. I want to understand more about the responsibilities that I would have, using would, hypothetical, to say it's not real, that I would have working with this team. Would I be responsible for? So then you might then add a question. But stating I want to understand more about can be a very good beginning, and you may or may not ask a question. If you want to say that you have a few questions, saying something like, I'd like to ask a few questions about, I'd like to ask a few questions about the specific day-to-day responsibilities of the role. So if I understand it correctly, then you might ask some questions, or you might state what you think is true, A, B, and C. If I understand it correctly, I would be working with the project managers, and I would be working with the back-end developer team to, is that correct? Then you just say, is that correct? To show that you have a good understanding of the role. Okay, that might be a good way to mention that topic. Okay? I was just wondering about, usually that I was wondering if is a small thing. Usually a quick thing you want to mention. Oh, I was just wondering about the remote work policy. So then you could get into that. You could then ask a question or just say that you're wondering about it, and the interviewer should know that what you want is for them to explain more. Then again, I'd like to discuss, again, something kind of slightly uncomfortable, awkward. I'd like to discuss compensation. I'd like to discuss salary. Could we do that? So, what about salary? Let's get into that. Okay. So before we do that, Elise is here and Potter is here. Awesome. Fantastic. Do you have a pronunciation question? We're getting very close here to the end of our lesson, so I want to make sure if you have any specific questions that you're able to ask those, and we're going to do that in the Q&A in a few minutes. So get those questions ready. Start typing those out now so that you can just hit enter. I mean, you can ask them now if you want to. I want to understand more about My role in this company, says Elise, the only thing I would change with your answer, I want to understand more about what my role would be. Instead of just saying my role, it could be a little uncomfortable to say my role because you don't have it yet. What my role would be. The would makes it clear that it is hypothetical, that it is not real. And so it creates a bit of distance, which you probably want in this situation. When I get this job, what will, that could be a little, I don't know, a little direct. And it could feel like you're assuming that you've got the job already, and that might not be the best thing to do. Okay. So how do we talk about salary? How do we talk about salary? Well, what I'm not going to, this is different country by country, right? So I don't want to make any grand statements about how to negotiate. There are a lot of different ways to do it. Those things change over time. What I do want to do is just give you some examples. How would you state a salary request, right? The topic of compensation comes up because you asked about it, or hopefully because the interviewer has asked about it. This may also be something that happens in email. Perhaps, probably it is, something that you're asked about in email before to get a sense for what you would like to be paid, right? Reasonable compensation. So it can be tricky because you obviously don't want to ask too low when they say, oh, yeah, of course, because they'll probably say yes. I personally feel like it's better to ask for more as long as it's not a ridiculous and insulting number, because why not? You want to do research to understand, for your experience, for where you live, in your industry, all of those factors, what is the range, right? And then if that's the realistic range, my personal recommendation would be to, choose a range that's slightly on the higher end of that. That's just me. But of course, it depends on where you are. It depends on a lot of things. So take that with a pinch of salt. But how do we say this? How do we actually express it? Okay, I'm going to give you two ways. Given my experience and skill set. So I'm stating up front, here's why I'm asking. You have to be prepared for this, by the way, in the interview. You need to know this going in because you could be asked at any time. Given my experience and skill set, a salary range between X and Y would be reasonable, I think. My opinion, the I think shows that I'm willing to negotiate. If you say, I want X, maybe not the best way to say that. Given my experience and skill set, I think this would be reasonable. That's a way to state, okay, I did research, I understand what's kind of on the table possibly, and I'm willing to listen to your opinion. So what do you think, right? I think does that. And I don't think that I think is not showing confidence or something. I think it's a good way to show that you're willing to have a discussion about it. Or you could say, I'm open to discussing the range, but, so I'm open to discussion. I want to hear what you think. But my ideal starting salary or compensation would be somewhere between X and Y. I recommend a range, if you wanted to say, would be X, and you state a number. I think it's okay, but there you want to make sure that that number is something you really want, right? Often people will give a range, but ideal starting salary shows that I want to develop with this company. I want to hopefully make more and more in the future as I get promotions and so on, right? So just a few ways you can ask that uncomfortable question and then state your ideal salary. Adriana, hello. LinkedIn user says they can always negotiate you down rather than the other way. Yeah, it's better to be negotiated down, but they'll never, once you state it, this is a general rule, I think, of negotiation. You can never change if you say, oh, I want this much. No, actually, I want more. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So I'm just curious, how comfortable do you feel asking about salary? Is this a comfortable topic for you? I'm curious about this. How do you feel about it? Do you mind if you were in an interview today? Is this something that makes you feel awkward, strange, uncomfortable? Do you feel, yeah, this is a great topic to talk about? I think it's different in different places, so I'm very curious how you feel about it. Just your general feeling, right? Comfortable, uncomfortable, awkward, natural, right? Exciting. I really want to know. And if you have any other thoughts on that process, negotiation, for example, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have experience or thoughts about mentioning the salary issue or negotiating. Practice More English says, how do we ask for a salary raise? That's a different question for sure, because you're already there, right? And also, I'm not quite sure it's too closely connected to the interview process. I think it depends very much on the relationship between you and your employer and who you're going to be talking with. And then the way that you would say that would depend on those things. So there are so many different factors I would want to know first before I would want to give specific advice about asking for a raise. Abdul says, asking salary is the hardest part. Ratik says, comfortable. Tahir says, no, it's a great topic to discuss at the end of the interview. I agree with that, but I do think it happens more often by email. That's just what I've seen, perhaps more often by email. No, it's a great topic to discuss by the end of the interview. Comfortable, yes, okay. So, today we've talked about how we can answer any kind of question, even if you're not ready, thinking about why are they asking me this? What do I want to show? Can I mention an example or tell a story? Can I show an outside perspective and be myself, right? We have talked about how to use a story or an example to demonstrate something, right? When you're sharing something, a story can show it rather than just telling it, right? A story is a very powerful way to communicate your skills, your knowledge, your experience, right? We talked about hypotheticals, right? And we went through a few of those phrases that you can use when you're answering a hypothetical, because that can be a little tricky. You want to make sure that your English is correct on those hypotheticals. If I were, I would. Because if it's not, it can cause confusion. Very important to make sure you practice those patterns, those hypothetical patterns, so that you can use them naturally, right? Always, of course, very important to have some questions ready to go, right? And to be highlighting your experience, you want to remember why you're answering each question, right? You want to remember, what am I trying to show? Everything that happens in the interview, what am I trying to show? What am I trying to communicate? And can I do that in a natural and authentic way, right? And one thing we didn't really talk about, but something I would say is very important, if you have a friend who can help you practice for the interview, you should practice with a friend. Have them give you 25 questions, ask you 25 questions. You practice answering those. You're going to start to gain confidence. It's going to sound more natural, right? So very important to practice. And if you have a native English-speaking friend who can, spend a half an hour twice a week with you for a little while, practicing your answers, that's going to be a big benefit. And I think a great way to connect with a friend. So be sure to do that. Okay. Francisco from Argentina, hello. So, do you have any questions about anything we've talked about today, around the interview process, around cultural aspect of the interview process, around anything that we've discussed so far in this series, phrasing, language, anything along those lines? Now's the time to ask. We'll spend a bit of time here just going over some of those things. Or if you have any other comments you want to mention, that's great too. Joanna says, I have never had a job interview because I have been working for my employer since 2008. It's time for a change. Interesting. Okay, well, Joanna, I would say check out the previous lessons in this series, and I think you can use this 5-lesson series as a mini course for helping you prepare for an interview. Hopefully it can help. And good luck. Good luck. What kind of position is it? I'm curious. It is uncomfortable for me, but it is uncomfortable for me, but I don't like my feeling. Okay. Tahir, when I interviewed people, I did mention the salary starting point with 0.0. I'm a little unclear on what you mean by that, Tahir. When I interviewed people, I did mention the salary starting with 0.0. Potter says, well, I think it's incredibly an awkward situation, but still I do think it depends on who, friendly or not, we negotiated with, right? I think that's true. It does depend somewhat on the personality of the person involved. Yes, absolutely. I had discussed salary in one interview for a teacher's post, a teaching position. They wanted to give less than what I thought was necessary, maybe less than what I was expecting, They told me that they couldn't. That's why it would be very important to state that there is room for negotiation and to do research. So if at the beginning you do research and you know what's within the realm of realistic, right? And then you state that and make it clear using perhaps one of the 2 ways we talked about in the lesson, make it clear that you are able to negotiate, right? That it's not a fixed thing, that you're willing to be flexible. Then again, I think they're less likely to say, I'm sorry, that's not reasonable for us. We can't do that. How to answer the horrible "what are your weaknesses" question. I see that you missed our previous lessons. What a shame. So if you go back and watch the first 3 lessons of our interview series, you will see one of our lessons is mostly dedicated to talking about strengths and weaknesses. So I'm not going to go over it too much because we spent quite a bit of time working on it. But one thing would be, when you're talking about your weaknesses, to mention something that you have already made progress on that is actually a weakness. Not one of those weaknesses that's kind of actually it's a strength, but you say it as a weakness. A legitimate weakness, but something that you're making progress toward. And we went over a bunch of specific English phrases that you might use when you're answering the strengths and weaknesses question. Or questions rather. So check out the previous lessons. Practice More English says, it's so useful and interesting to listen to you. I wish I had joined the session earlier, but I believe they are available. They're up still, so you can certainly go back and review those. Yes, you missed last week's. Got to go back and watch the previous one. The whole thing it's a whole 5-lesson series, and next week we're doing another one. And in next week's lesson, we're going to be getting into pitching yourself, how you can think about that, handling those cultural differences in the interview setting, and perhaps in more workplace-related situations. So we're going to be really getting into some interesting, more advanced stuff, which I hope you will enjoy. So I hope you can join next Thursday at the same time. And you can watch on Facebook, you can watch on LinkedIn, and you can watch on YouTube if you go to any of those and search Pearson English. So you're already here, so you know, but just so you know. This is a job interview series with Pearson English, and I'm super excited for next week's lesson. Joanna says, I work as a teacher. I can't negotiate my salary because it's stable in my country. The government decides how much we're paid. Yeah, for a lot of teaching positions, I think that's the case. I don't know where you're located, but in the United States, for public schools, especially middle school, high school, that sort of thing, it's also, I believe, fixed. It's not like you can go into the school and say, I want $90,000. And actually, from what I understand, a lot public school teachers in the United States, not true everywhere. I suppose it's state by state, but it can be tough. I know in my home state, the starting salary is not as high as in a lot of other countries. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining. It's been absolutely great to have you here. Again, I hope you can join for next week's final lesson. So make sure you check out the links for that, and make sure you join. You can go back and watch the previous lessons if you missed those. If I missed your question today, I sincerely apologize, but I think I got to everything. Again, thank you so much for joining. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day and weekend and whatever else you're doing. Good luck studying English. Good luck in your job interviews, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everybody. Thanks again. See ya.